Previously, we saw the arrival of Colonel General Gotthard Heinrici to the secret headquarters of the Zosen. Today, we'll look at the impossible task he'd be required to do for the survival of Nazi Germany. Inside the Zosen headquarters, the first person Heinrici and von Beyler, his adjutant, saw was Lieutenant General Hans Krebs, Guderian's chief of staff, who had been injured in the raid. A monocle rammed in his right eye, he sat behind a desk in an office close to Guderian's, his head wrapped in a large white turban of bandages. Heinrici did not care much for Krebs. Though the chief of staff was extremely intelligent, Heinrici saw him as a man who refused to believe the truth, who could change black to white so as to minimize the true situation for Hitler. A minute later, Krebs was escorting Heinrici to the office of the General Staff of the OKH, General Heinz Guderian. Heinrici saw that Guderian was tense and edgy, broad-shouldered, of medium height, with thinning grey hair and a straggling moustache. Guderian seemed much older than his 56 years. Although it was not generally known, he was a sick man, suffering from high blood pressure and a weak heart, a condition that was not alleviated by his constant frustrations. These days, the creator of Hitler's massive panzer forces, the general whose armored techniques had brought about the capture of France in 1940 in just 27 days, and who had nearly succeeded in accomplishing as much in Russia, found himself almost completely powerless. Even as chief of the general staff, he had virtually no influence with Hitler. A hot-tempered officer at the best of times, Guderian was now thwarted. Heinrici had heard that he was subject to violent rages. As soon as they got down to business, Heinrici spoke frankly. "I have been in the wilderness of Hungary. I know almost nothing about the Army Group Vistula, what it's composed of, or what the situation is on the order." Guderian was equally blunt in his response. He replied, "I should tell you, Heinrici, that Hitler did not want to give you this command. He had somebody else in mind. I was responsible. I told Hitler that you were the one man needed. At first he wouldn't consider you at all. Finally, I got him to agree." Even after 20 years, Heinrici, who was listening, would remember in detail the conversation that followed. "Himmler," cried Guderian. "That was the biggest problem, getting rid of the man you're going to replace, Himmler." Heinrici had only recently learned that Reichsfuhrer Heinrich Himmler was commander of Army Group Vistula. He knew of Himmler as a member of Hitler's inner circle, probably the most powerful man in Germany after Hitler. But he did not know that Himmler had any experience in commanding troops in the field, let alone directing the activities of a group of armies. Bitterly, Guderian recounted that incident. To command the group, Guderian had suggested Field Marshal Freiherr von Weichs. At that time, he was just the man for the situation, Guderian said. But what happened? Hitler said von Weichs was too old. Alfred Jodl was present at the meeting, and I expected him to support me, but he made some remark about von Weichs' religious feelings. That ended the matter. Then, thundered Guderian, whom did we get? Hitler appointed Himmler, of all people, Heinrich Himmler. Guderian had, in his own words, argued and pleaded against the appalling and preposterous appointment of Heinrich Himmler. This man who had no military knowledge, but Hitler remained adamant. Under Himmler, the front had all but collapsed. The Red Army had moved exactly as Guderian had predicted. Once the Russians were across the Vistula, part of their forces swung north and reached the Baltic at Danzig, cutting off and encircling some 20 to 25 divisions. The remaining Soviet armies sliced through Pomerania and Upper Silesia, reached the Oder and the Neisse rivers. Everywhere along the Eastern Front, the German line was overwhelmed. But no sector had collapsed as fast as Himmler's had. His failure had opened up the gates to the main drive across Germany and the link up with the Western Allies. Above all, it had placed Berlin in jeopardy. Guderian told Heinrici that just 48 hours ago he had driven to the Army Group Vistula headquarters at Birkenhain, roughly 50 miles north of Berlin, to try and persuade Himmler to give up the command. There he was informed that Himmler was sick. He had finally located the SS commander some 20 miles away near the town of Leichen, hiding in a hospital with nothing more than a headache. Guderian quickly saw that Himmler's so-called illness could be used to advantage. He expressed sympathy with the Reichsfuhrer and suggested that perhaps he had been overworking, that the number of posts he held would tax the strength of any man. Besides being the commander of Army Group Vistula, the ambitious Himmler was also Minister of the Interior, Chief of the Gestapo, the German police forces, and the security services, the head of the SS, and the commander of the training army. Why not relinquish one of these posts? Guderian suggested. Say, for example, the Army Group Vistula. Guderian's tactic had worked. Himmler grabbed the proposal. It was all too true, he said, Guderian. So many jobs I did indeed called for enormous endurance. But, Himmler asked, how can I possibly suggest to Hitler that I give up Vistula? Guderian quickly told Himmler that he himself would suggest it to Hitler. And that very night, Hitler relieved the so-called overworked and overburdened Reichsfuhrer. But only after a lot of grumbling and with obvious reluctance. Guderian now returned to the present conversation with Heinrici. The mess we are in is fantastic. The way the war is being run is unbelievable. Through the previous months, Guderian recalled, he had tried to get Hitler to understand that the real danger lay on the Eastern Front and that drastic measures were necessary. He urged a series of strategic withdrawals from the Baltic states, particularly from Kurland in Latvia and from the Balkans, and even suggested abandoning Norway and Italy. Everywhere lines needed shortening, each division relieved could be sped to the Russian front. According to intelligence, the Russians had twice as many divisions as the Western Allies, yet there were fewer German divisions fighting in the east than in the west. Furthermore, the best German divisions were facing Eisenhower and not the Russians. But Hitler refused to go on the defensive. He would not believe the facts and figures that were placed before him. Then Guderian declared Hitler made possibly his greatest error. In December 1944, he unleashed his massive last throw of the dice offensive against the Western Allies through the rolling forests of the Ardennes in Belgium and northern Luxembourg. The attack, Hitler boasted, would split the Allies and change the whole course of the war. Against the center of the Allied line, he hurled 3 fully equipped armies, a total of 20 divisions of which 12 were armored. Their objective, to break through, reach the Meuse, and swing north and capture the vital supply port of Antwerp. Caught off balance, the Allies reeled under the blow and fell back with heavy losses, but the offensive soon petered out. Swiftly recovering, Allied troops drove Hitler's shattered armies back behind Germany's borders in just 5 weeks. When it became obvious that the offensive had failed, Guderian said, I begged Hitler to get our troops out of the Ardennes and put them on the Eastern Front, where we expected the Russian offensive at any moment. It was no use. He refused to believe our estimates of their strength. On January 9th, Guderian told Hitler that the Russians could be expected to launch their attack from the Baltic to the Balkans with a massive force totaling some 225 divisions and 22 armored corps. The situation estimate had been prepared by General Reinhard Gehlen, Guderian's chief of intelligence. It indicated that the Russians would outnumber the Germans in infantry by 11-1, in armor by 7-1, in both artillery and aircraft by at least 20-1. Hitler pounded the table and in a frenzy denounced the author of the report. Who prepared this rubbish? He roared. Whoever he is, he should be committed to a lunatic asylum. However, 3 days later the Russians attacked and Gehlen was proved right. The front virtually collapsed, Guderian told Heinrici, simply because most of our panzer forces were tied down in the west. Finally, Hitler agreed to shift some of the armor, but he would not let me use the tanks to attack the Russian spearheads east of Berlin. Where did he send them? To Hungary, where they were thrown into a perfectly useless attack to recapture the oil fields. Why, even now, there are 18 divisions sitting in Courland, tied down, doing nothing. They are needed here, not in the Baltic states. If we are going to survive, everything has to be here on the order front. The Russians are looking down our throats. They have halted our offensive to reorganize and regroup. We estimate that you will have 3 to 4 weeks until the floods go down to prepare. In that time, the Russians will try to establish new bridgeheads on the western bank and broaden those they already have. These have to be thrown back. No matter what happens elsewhere, the Russians must be stopped on the Oder River. Heinrici, it is our only hope. Dejected and discouraged, Heinrici called for maps, and that was his first real look at the overall situation. More than a third of Germany was gone in its hourglass shape. The Third Reich was virtually in ruins. As he studied the map, Guderian spoke on about the stupid and suicidal missions of Hitler, how he forced military officers into carrying out operations which were suicidal and had no strategic or military value. Heinrici, still examining the map, saw that the sector between Küstrin and Frankfurt were jammed with Russian troops. Even if the attack could be launched from the bridgehead, the Russians were so strong that the German divisions would never reach Küstrin. Solemnly, Heinrici warned, "Our troops will be pinned with their backs to the Oder. It will be a disaster." Guderian made no comment. There was nothing to say. Suddenly he glanced at his watch and said irritably, "Oh God, I've got to get back to Berlin for the Führer's conference at 3. The mere thought of it set off another furious outburst. "It is impossible to work," Guderian spurted. "Twice a day I stand for hours listening to that group around Hitler talking nonsense, discussing nothing. I can't get anything done. I spend all of my time either on the road or in Berlin listening to pure foolishness." Guderian's rage was so violent that it alarmed Heinrici. The chief of staff's face had turned beet red, and for a moment Heinrici feared that Guderian would drop dead on the spot from a heart attack. There was another anxious silence as Guderian fought for control. Then he said, "Hitler is going to discuss the Küstrin attack. Perhaps you had better come with me." Heinrici declined. "If I'm supposed to launch this insane attack the day after tomorrow on the Russians, I'd better go to my headquarters as soon as possible." Then he stubbornly added, "Hitler can wait a few more days to see me." Outside in the waiting room, Heinrici's driver and aide von Beiler was killing time looking at the maps. It showed the whole of Germany, but the lines on it somehow seemed different. Von Beiler was about to turn away when something caught his eye. He looked closer. One of the maps was different from all the others. It was the lettering that caught his attention. It was not in German, but in English. Von Beiler bent down and began to study it carefully. It didn't take him more than a minute to recognize that the map was British. How deep had Nazi Germany already submerged at this point? What would come off of the operations on the Western Front, and most importantly, the one Heinrici was about to carry out at the Oder? Find out in the next episode of The Last Battle.